All righty, Rand, thanks for jumping in. So for our listeners today, we have Rand Fishkin. Is that how I say that right?
You got it.
Perfect. So Rand, we're excited to have you on here. Tell us a little about who you are, kind of what your background is, things you're passionate about.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can have the professional side or the personal side.
Whatever's going to be the best story. That's all that really matters.
Oh, the best story, man. Let's see. So I am from Seattle. I think of myself as from Seattle, but there's a bunch of Seattle traditionalists who are basically like, no, you were born in New Jersey, which is true. I was born in Hunterdon County, New Jersey, and moved here when I was 3 months old. So depending on how picky and pedantic you are, I'm either from New Jersey or Seattle. But yeah, basically been here my whole life. I just turned 42, and it's kind of weird because there's not a lot of people who are from Seattle and like have lived here for forever. But for some reason, I love the rain, and so it works out great for me. Let's see. I am well known on the internet, which is sort of odd, for basically three things. One is starting a company called Muse, which is in the SEO space. That I left that company about 4 years ago. Started a new one, SparkToro, published a book called Lost and Founder. And all those sort of professional things in digital marketing world, I'm reasonably well known for. I do a lot of speaking and blogging, and had a popular video series called Whiteboard Friday. Reasonably well known for that. And then I might be most famously known for being married to actual internet celebrity Geraldine DeRuyter, who's a James Beard Award-winning author and humorist, and I don't know, gets into fights with Lin-Manuel Miranda online. It's kind of great.
Wow, I didn't know coming into this.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit surprised.
I mean, having a famous spouse is kind of a badge of honor.
That's super cool. It's like Beaudry's eyes went super big. I'll be honest, I don't know anything outside of my 9-to-5 world, but that's super cool. So I kind of want to dive into like your journey, because you've been everywhere and you've been a part of like so many different things. Like, tell us about, your time at like Moz. I guess you spent a little bit of time at HubSpot. Like, that's cool. Like,
technically, no. So Dharmesh Shah, who's the co-founder of HubSpot, and I started I don't know what you want to call it, side project together, a community called inbound.org, which, gained some popularity and traction for a while. And then HubSpot kind of took that project over from us.
Got it.
A number of years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and basically tried to run it for a while, and then wound it down / integrated it with the rest of their community efforts. Okay. Yeah, I've only worked at 2 places ever really in my adult life. Just Moz, the company I started with my mom, Jillian, for 17 years. And then the last 4 at SparkToro. Okay.
Tell us a little bit about Moz and like how you got into it.
Yeah. So I dropped out of college and had
Love to hear that.
Yeah, no particularly exciting prospects, but was really interested in the internet. I loved building websites and like designing for the web. I loved the promise of the early internet to sort of democratize information access and all that kind of stuff. I was, one of those kids in the 90s who jumped on BBSs with all my friends and, tried to build those little micro communities in the early days of the web. Had the dial-up modem that was taking up my parents' phone line, all of those cultural markers. And yeah, when my mom, Jillian, who had been running a small business marketing consultancy, doing like logos, letterheads, yellow page ads, billboards, all that kind of stuff for local businesses in Seattle, obviously when the late 90s hit, her clients started wanting websites. And so I was like, yeah, I'll build some websites for my mom's, clients on the side and get a few $100 for college and whatever. And then I had this super weird experience in college. I was working at the Wizards of the Coast Game Center, which was on University Way in the U District, like at the reception desk. And I used my employee discount to buy Pokemon cards and then resell them on Craigslist and eBay. And by doing that, I made enough over the course of like a summer and like a little bit of fall quarter, made enough to cover my tuition, my rent, my books. I mean, you can't do this anymore, right? This is 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
So like impossible to make this much money now. But at the time, you know, the University of Washington was like $4,500 a year for tuition or something. Now it's probably like 20,000 or something ridiculous. But yeah, I just was like, oh, sweet. The internet plus commerce plus web design, like this is a skill set. I can turn this into something. And so that was basically how I got started into that world, and then had many years where we just failed miserably as a web design consultancy, went deep into debt, you know, almost had to do a bankruptcy thing, and then managed to dig ourselves out of it after we sort of discovered SEO, started doing that for our clients. And I started this blog called SEO Moz, which is what became the company Moz. And through that consulting practice and that blog and sort of early, you know, what would now be termed a content marketing engine, but at the time was just like, I like to blog every night about SEO. That became a huge engine and driver of the business. We got lots of inbound stuff, you know, tons of venture capital backed companies were like using our services. And I was speaking at all these conferences and events. And then that turned into, hey, let's build some software for SEO to help ourselves. And then let's open source that so other people can get access to it. And, you know, we'll ask them for a PayPal subscription to get the tools that we're using. In 2007, that quickly overtook the consulting business as our primary driver of revenue. And then, yeah, I became the CEO and we raised a bunch of money and blah, 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 off to the races. That whole VC-backed journey and experience being a, you know, whatever, classic kind of startup founder.
just the blah, 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 you know, that part.
Blah, 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 venture capital.
Just the cool stuff everybody wants to hear about.
Yeah,
oh my God.
The raising of millions, you know.
Yeah. Man, I still have a big bone to pick with the whole idea that raising millions of dollars is more interesting or valuable or important or worth talking about than making $1 million.
You and I are on the same page.
That's a great
in that
point,
sense.
yeah.
It is so weird that like basically the venture asset class has convinced the press and media and sort of the social media world and a lot of the world of influencers and podcasts and everybody to talk about stories of people raising lots of money and the valuations of their businesses. Like, oh, you're a unicorn, you're worth $1 billion, right? In our portfolio. And that is more newsworthy than what was your revenue like? How are your profits? How many customers did you delight?
Don't worry about all that. We just raised a ton of money. That's all that matters.
Oh, okay, great.
Well, and I think that's like what starts to happen. It's funny. It's like as you're going and raising, it's like ignore all those other things. Just say you're $1 billion company. Like everything else doesn't matter. We're just $1 billion company. Invest in us. All right. Yeah. Like that's kind of what it's turned into. But I think majority of the exciting founders that we've had on this episode, I would say more than 70% of them have been bootstrapped, like initially. And I think those are, I feel like, the crazy stories you get to hear. Those are the ones that I really, really like to hear about. So,
but not only that, but like, I don't know. I would say that the people that have raised money are usually the ones that are like, hey, don't raise money. I really wish we would have done it differently.
I mean, statistically speaking, you could not expect any other outcome, right? Even if you're a venture capital investor, the model is put money into 500 companies, 485 of them or so will die, right? They'll essentially be bad experiences for the founders, the employees, and the team, and the investors, and the customers, right? Like everybody's going to have a bad time. But you know, there's 15 companies where it goes reasonably well to incredibly well. And those are the stories that we want to amplify because we need the next 500 founders to go try and become one of those 5, 10, 15. And so it's a little bit like the lottery, right?
Yeah.
You go to a state lottery, you know, thing, and it's like the media is not going to write about here's 9,000 people who played the lottery and lost and their sad stories.
Yep.
They're going to interview the lottery winner.
Yep. And let everybody think that's them, which is kind of
and everybody, right? And everybody thinks that's them. I think this is one of the the most uniquely American things in the world of capitalism is just because, you are whatever poor and struggling and you haven't made it yet doesn't mean that tomorrow your ship isn't coming in. Right. And so everybody in the US, what's the famous quote that like 80% of people in the world of a capitalist economy, they all think they are temporarily embarrassed millionaires. I think that's true in venture capital too.
Which is really funny because you're part of Tiny Seed as well, correct?
Yeah.
Which is really cool because we had Rob on the show with us and we talked with Rob. Rob's just an incredible guy, by the way. What's your relationship with him?
So Rob and I think met at a conference many years ago. We've maintained a like online friendship, email each other every few years. And then when we started SparkToro and used this sort of very different funding structure and reward structure, right, profit sharing structure for our investors, Rob and his partner Einar reached out to Casey and I and basically said like, hey, we love what you're doing in SparkToro. Could we use your open sourced funding structure as the basis for how we build Tiny Seed's investment structure? And we said, absolutely, like that's the whole idea. And then we referred them to our attorney, Joe Wallen, that we used for the SparkToro funding structure. And then Tiny Seed ended up, following in SparkToro's footsteps in terms of that structure. And of course, I was so excited about that I was like, Geraldine, my wife, I was like, I want to invest. Let's invest in Tiny Seed.
Yeah.
And so we became investors as well.
So I guess that kind of transitions us to, let's talk about SparkToro a little bit and tell our listeners, kind of explain what it is and kind of what led you kind of to that point.
Yeah, sure. So SparkToro, like my previous company, Muse, is in marketing software, but rather than being in search engine optimization and sort of helping you with Google rankings and all that kind of stuff, SparkToro is around audience research. So basically understanding who are the people that are in your audience, what are their online behaviors, what are their demographics, what do they read, what do they watch, what do they listen to, what do they follow, what do they subscribe to online. And so, I had a call right before this with our newest team member, Amanda Natividad, and she and I were going through like looking at orthodontists, right? Like in SparkToro and saying like, oh, okay, well, for people who use the word in their profile, orthodontist, what's their online behavior? And like, oh, well, they tend to use these hashtags and here's the like social accounts they're following. Here's the podcasts that they listen to. Here's the YouTube channels they subscribe to. Here's the websites they visit. And, like that kind of data is ludicrously, painfully difficult to come by if you don't have a product like SparkToro. Like it just previous to us building this company, I don't even know how I would tell people to go get that. Like surveys and interviews are probably it, and it's not going to be good, right? Because like
that's a ton of work, by the way.
Oh my God, you could pay a market research firm literally like $50,000 to go do a market research survey and like, hey, I really want to know whatever channels that we should invest in strategically for our marketing. So, hey, market research firm, go tell me what podcasts and YouTube channels and websites and social accounts, blah, 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 blah.
Where do we need to get in front of these people
and how they describe themselves? And you will pay a fortune. It will take 6 to 12 months or longer. You will get a ton of bias built in because, if you survey the wrong people or if you only survey the ones that you're connected to and you don't get sort of full coverage, like it's just, it is brutally difficult to get this data at scale accurately. But thankfully, like the insight that Casey and I had was like, there are enough people in any given sphere who have put their information publicly on the web, right? They have a public Facebook profile, public LinkedIn, public Twitter, public Instagram. You can go visit those pages and see what they follow and words that they use and hashtags and YouTube channels they subscribe to, and then you can connect them up, right? If you go to someone's like, oh, here, Austin, I'll go visit your Twitter account. Oh, and that links to your LinkedIn. And oh, your LinkedIn points to your Facebook and your Twitter or your Instagram or your YouTube. And like, oh, okay, well, your Instagram's private, so we don't have any data about that. But like the other ones, you can get them all, right? You can even find this
it's all public knowledge. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And so we were seeing some marketers and market researchers do exactly this. They were like going to Google, searching for literally one by one the names of the people who had like signed up to their email list, and then trying to crawl them all, put them into a giant Excel spreadsheet and show what their behaviors were online. And we were like, oh my God, that's so ludicrously difficult, such a pain in the ass amount of work. And let's just do that for the whole internet. Right? And so that's what SparkToro is.
I feel like it's super easy to kind of like paint that picture and explain like how like the things work. But from like a technology standpoint, how many iterations did you make on this thing? How many developers did you bring on? Like, what did MVP look like? Tell me about kind of like that story.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so embarrassingly, SparkToro is incredibly straightforward. Granted, Casey, the only developer, my co-founder, is a very talented front, back end, middleware. Like he's sort of a special, unicorn, zebra type of guy. You'll rarely find someone with his skill set who has his combination of sort of patience and humility and ability to work quickly, efficiency, and he's like a full-time stay-at-home dad too, right? So he's got 2 little girls, and his partner works full-time, and so he's like the caretaker. But yeah, he's also just incredibly fast at this stuff. But SparkToro is simple as heck. Like Austin, it's basically, we go out, we find public social profiles, we crawl them just like Google does. Mm-hmm. We index the content behind there, and we're just we have tons of cron jobs that are just like always crawling, always extracting data, just like Google's crawler is constantly grabbing this data. And then essentially it just builds a big index that you can search across. So there's no fancy machine learning. There's no like sophisticated algorithms. This is just grade school division. We basically look at, here's 700 orthodontists in the United States. Let's do the overlap of like, what do they pay attention to the most? Here, they follow like these social accounts. These are the like most followed social accounts by people with orthodontist in their bio or profile or about section on LinkedIn or whatever it is. Boom. 17% of orthodontists listen to this podcast. 12% subscribe to this YouTube channel. The complicated part is crawling and indexing and building that data set. The easy part is what you see in SparkToro. It is not it is not fancy or sophisticated. It's really that easy.
That's super cool, because I feel like most people, like even when I like initially like think of the concept, I feel like the very first thing I say is that sounds wildly, wildly complex and it would be super, super hard to build. So did it always start that way? Or did you guys just end up simplifying until like it just ended up making sense?
So I think, again, this goes back to sort of Casey's genius, and also he's really interesting in that he would describe himself as being a very easily frustrated person. And so he does not like to do work twice, right? So he's really a measure 16 times, cut once.
Yep.
And because of that, right, I think that essentially what he did was, I'm going to start building an index off purely a small sample set of Twitter profiles, because it's easy to crawl and all the data is public. And then we will start doing like, you, Rand, manually tell me things that you're interested in. I will crawl those profiles. We will extract out some data and we'll see if it looks interesting and useful. It's starting to look interesting and useful. Great. Let's do more. Okay, now let's build a job that's constantly indexing Twitter. Okay, now let's build a job that, basically looks at the Twitter profile and tries to find a LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram account that's associated. Okay, we got that for like 30 or 40% of profiles. Now we have like 2 or more social networks for all these. Okay, now let's go to the next step of let's go crawl the websites that have these and let's look for social accounts on them. Aha, now I have more data about each of these profiles. Boom, 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 right? And so it was an extremely iterative process every single time. Casey was essentially building something pretty manual behind the scenes. And then we were validating step by step whether that data looked useful, interesting, and accurate.
Got it.
And, I think this process is, I would never build a startup another way. After doing this, I would never do it kind of the way that, the way I did a lot of product development at Muse was a lot of conceptualizing with product people and marketing people in a room, whiteboarding things out, and then wireframing, and then giving a huge list of requirements to engineers, right? To a big engineering team, and having them build that all, and then doing, testing and then beta testing and launch. I would never do that again, right? From now on, it's always the engineer and the product person go iterate and build the smallest potentially useful thing, validate that thing worked for them, and then keep moving along until you have something that is useful and interesting that you want to show to a small number of. We started with our investors, like we have 35 investors. We basically showed those folks like, hey, here's what we've got. Play around with this, see what you think, give us feedback. We got a bunch of feedback from them. Then we did a tiny little beta cohort of just like agencies and consultants and in-house marketers that I knew personally from my years at Moz. We invited that small group. We grew that to a few hundred people. We did a second cohort after that. And then once we saw those people were getting like a lot of value and being very excited about it, then we went to a launch.
Got it. What was your initial like development timeline from, all of the validation stuff to launching?
Let's see. So I started SparkToro almost 14 hours after I left Moz. So
what? That fast?
I love that. That's so fun to me.
I'm glad you took a vacation. Way to take a vacation. Took 14 hours off.
Boundary, man, you got to take time off for yourself, for like
14 hours.
It's so funny because I feel like once you get started in the game, it's really hard to like get out. Like, I don't know, the process is fun.
Yeah, I will say so. Like, half of that was me wanting to jump right back in ASAP, but the other half was, oh shit, I need an income and health insurance. We just. You're in the US too, right? So like social safety net here, not really existing. And so, we were in this situation. My wife is an author, right? But she doesn't have like life, health insurance through her publishers or anything like that. And so basically that was March of 2018. We were showing a version of the product to our investors by March of 2019. So those first 3 or 4 months, I was talking to Casey. I recruited him on board. He joined, I think, in May or June of 2018. We raised money in June of 2018. And then it was like, okay, we're hitting the track. And basically 9 months, 10 months after Casey joined, we had a prototype product we were showing investors. That summer, so 3 or 4 months later, we had a kind of an alpha version that we were showing to a small group of marketers. And by that fall, we were running our 2 beta cohorts. So it was, it was about 18 months to we have a beta. And I'm really glad, like we had to raise that money. I didn't have that much in savings. I would not have been able to like self-fund the company. We raised 1.3 million from 36 angel investors and basically spent a little over half of that money to get to our launch point, the inflection of being profitable, which happened about 6 months after we launched.
Got it. Okay, so I've got like a ton of questions now after hearing this. So in the sense of like, and I want to do this to also showcase to like listeners. So initially explaining your idea and even you just explaining it to me, it sounds like it was a super, super simple product, but I'm hearing it took 18 months to develop and get to a beta. So were there a bunch of people working on this full time? Was there just that much incremental validation? What made it take 18 months?
Yeah, a lot of the technology is a pain in the butt to build. Like, I don't know if you've tried to crawl LinkedIn and extract data from them, but they make that a pain in the butt. Facebook makes it a pain in the butt to get data from them. Instagram makes it a pain in the butt. Twitter is probably the easiest of the bunch, but even they are not super easy. And so like crawling all that data, extracting it, then turning that into a useful, usable, fast, responsive database. If you run a SparkToro search, right, it's, you can go and just run like free searches and you'll see it's 3 seconds, 5 seconds to get.
I've done it. It's super fast.
Yeah,
like I wouldn't even have known you were doing that.
Yeah. So like behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of not easy to build, time consuming to make to make feel easy technology, right?
Yes.
So I don't want to minimize Casey's contributions. The product concept is incredibly simple and straightforward. When you think about what is happening at SparkToro, it is I go search, SparkToro looks at a huge database of public social profiles that it's crawled, it extracts out the data, measures the overlap, and shows it to me.
But the execution is the hard part.
The execution is a ton of work. Like if you think about every little individual piece of technology that has to be built, like, okay, the LinkedIn data crawler. All right. Well, LinkedIn is constantly changing the format of how this data appears. And they're like, checking this stuff. And we have to make sure that we can connect up accounts correctly and just a million things.
And I was setting you up 100%. Like I knew that was going to be your answer and here's why. A lot of people come to us and they will do as much as they can to try and like simplify a pitch or simplify an idea. And they're like, it's simple, we need it done. And when we actually pull back the curtain, it's not that it hasn't been done before or that it's overly complex. You just have to have somebody sit down and put their hands on a keyboard and build it. And that just takes time, right? And no amount of like simplifying the idea takes away the amount of hours that go into building a product. And it's just super funny because it was hilarious. Somebody legitimately came to me one day with 5 screens and they're like, this is super simple. And I was like, cool, I'll bring my designer and let's see where it's at. Next thing you know, we're at like 50, 60 screens. Like it's a huge app. And it's like what people are starting to do is oversimplify their idea so they can explain it to a developer. And turns out behind the scenes, it's super complex. And so I wanted to throw that out to everybody that's listening is like, this sounds simple, but it's tough to build out.
Yeah,
so that's funny.
I think a lot of the simplest products, the most well-built, beautifully built, easy to use products take a long time to build because expressing that simplicity in a useful product is an art.
Yes. It's funny. We have I feel like an internal tool and we just call it automagical. And the more automagical something is, typically the easier it is to use, but the more it costs to build because it takes time to get it that simplified, right? So.
Rand, I got a question. When it came to your concept of what SparkToro is and what SparkToro is now, how far did you deviate? Because you literally would get a little bit and test it, and you'd probably pivot a little bit, and then you'd get a little bit more and test it and pivot. Did you stay on, or did your product really shift and change as you validated?
Yeah, great question. I would say we are closer than most products that I've worked on or been part of in terms of the initial concept and where we are today. The biggest change, I think, is we initially conceived of SparkToro as being very much about finding the sources of influence for your audience, like what YouTube channels they subscribe to, what social accounts they follow, what podcasts they listen to, all that type of stuff, so that you could go do marketing.
The same.
So that you could go do marketing in those places.
Yep.
And one of the things that we found fascinating, I would say probably 60, maybe even 70% of our customers and users use SparkToro to answer those kinds of questions. Like that is interesting to them. But there's a huge and growing group of people who use us more for audience research, persona building, analysis. It's not that they're going to go and pitch those YouTube channels. It's that they have to validate the audience for themselves or some other stakeholder. Like I'll give you an example. My favorite example, I have to anonymize it a little bit because I don't have permission to share the details, but there was a consultant who works in Hollywood, right? So this is like an audience strategist who advises a bunch of television shows, movies, studios, stuff like that. And a studio came to him. Their TV show had been dropped from the network that it was originally on. It was on like Hulu or Netflix or something like that, right? And it got canceled from that subscription platform. And the studio wanted to pitch other platforms like, hey, HBO Max or Disney Plus, or like, you guys should pick this up because look at the audience that we have for our show. And so this essentially market research strategist team, it's just 2 people, but they use SparkToro And I had a call with them and like we walked through like, here's how we can analyze this audience, find all the fans of this TV show. They follow all the actors, they use the hashtags, they're following the official accounts, they're using these words and phrases when they describe themselves online. Boom, 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 built a big, essentially presentation deck that they use to pitch other platforms. And it got picked up by one of the other platforms, one of the other like, big six. And like the SparkToro data was instrumental in them saying, you don't have this audience today, but if you pick up this show, these will become your subscribers.
Bringing a ton of value to that network.
And saving a TV show. Like that's, I mean, there's a lot of cool things SparkToro's done, but like save a TV show, super cool.
That's super cool. And
it's on the resume.
Funny. It's funny too, because you're also like beginning to like solve a problem that I feel like a lot of business owners just in general wait a super long time to actually solve. Like, who is your persona? Where are they? And how can we find them? Right?
How do we get in front of them?
For whatever reason, that is like the last thing a lot of customers or people like building apps try to solve. They're like, cool, it's out there in the world and I am now going to be a millionaire and people are just
it's like my app's done and now I'm going to have 2 million downloads. And our first question is how are you going to get these downloads, right? Like what are you going to do? And it's funny because when people, they have a budget, we always say when people give us a budget to build an app, our first question always is like, great, how much do you have to market the app? How are you going to get in front of these people? Where are you going to go? Like they have to have these strategies. And so, which is kind of why I kind of want to transition for our listeners. Rand, you have a book called Lost and Founders, correct? Tell us about this book and how this book could really help specifically our listeners who are listening to this podcast right now.
Oh, sure. So, I mean, let's say the three of us go out, grab a drink at a bar, or we get some coffee or, have a dinner or something. And inevitably what I found is, you have conversations about, I don't know what to call it, like the real shit.
Yeah.
That's
perfect.
The things that founders and builders and people in technology, startup, commerce world are challenged by, things that are uncomfortable, things that are emotional, things that we've struggled with. And we'll share stories about that. We'll talk about trends, things that we, hate and despise, things that we feel like are frustrating and creating mixed incentives and all that kind of stuff, right? Everything from, fundraising to managing people, to building teams, to trying to promote people, to, layoffs, to personal finances, like just all this stuff. And those private conversations do two things. Like they build up an incredible rapport, right? That is how a ton of my friendships and like a lot of the loving relationships that I built in the world, not romantic love, just like, oh, I really care about you deeply as a person and I want you to succeed and you want me to succeed and we want to help each other. And those conversations are just incredibly powerful and helpful. And I felt like I could not scale them, right? It's like, I don't have enough. I'm not in the right cities all at the right time with all of the right people. Like, how do I take these powerful conversations and make them accessible to more people, right? That was the whole idea behind Moz. The whole idea was like, how do I take all this SEO knowledge and make it accessible to everybody else? And that's what I wanted to do with my entrepreneurial experience, was make it accessible to other people. And so Lost and Founder, like if you go, read the reviews or whatever, that's exactly what you'll hear. People will be like, oh, damn, I cannot believe how brutally honest this book is about really hard stuff that people usually don't talk about, especially because most of the incentive behind like writing a book, if you're an entrepreneur, is I want to build a following, or I want to get people to think I'm really impressive so that they invite me to speak at their events. And so I get my next round of funding and I'm perceived as a thought leader or whatever it is. And thankfully, like I didn't need that stuff and I didn't want it. And so Lost and Founder is just
the real shit.
Here's what it was like to almost declare bankruptcy and try and hide a bunch of personal debt from my dad. Here's what it was like to try and build a company bootstrapped before we raised funding. Here's what it was like to have a painful conversation with my mom about her stepping down and me becoming CEO. Here's how, we built a team and like had all these relative markers of success while still not achieving what a venture-backed startup is supposed to do, and just all that stuff.
Yeah. And I think it's just like a super cool approach. And I'm glad like somebody finally did it. And I'm starting to kind of see on LinkedIn the trend shift a little bit more towards those harder stories, or the things that like aren't just all success stories. And it's starting to get more real. I think LinkedIn obviously has a long way to go before like that ever really becomes a thing. But it's super cool that like I can now go get this book and like hear all those bad stories, because I feel like that's where you really learn the most, is just listening to, or just digesting and hearing all of the different stories that were hard or tough. So,
yeah.
So with that being said, tell us about a time basically where you just totally missed the mark and messed up and failed. And what did you learn from that?
Sure. Yeah. I think one of the big like moments of high tension in the book is talking about the big investment that I started at Moz to essentially try and reach a much broader audience, right? I thought, oh no, the SEO world isn't big enough for us to hit our marks as a venture-backed company. I need to build a product that's also going to be, huge with email marketers and content marketers and PRs and social media marketers and all these other fields. And so let me build an all-in-one tool for digital marketing of all kinds across all. Oh my God, what a boondoggle, complete failure that was. And it took years to recover from. Like, I think in a way, even as of last year, Moz was still recovering from that. And it did it at the worst possible time, like just as Moz was getting more competition in the SEO software space, and as SEO was growing faster than it ever grown before, made this incredibly foolish decision to try and take over the world, right? And become, basically go from, hey, we have a really nice SaaS business that's growing 2x year over year. How do we become $1 billion unicorn faster?
Hyper growth.
Yep. And that totally sunk the company's trajectory.
A thing that you even see even now, like more and more, it's becoming even just rolling out like a new feature, like to a different area for like new companies, is now seen as like a big deal. And so, yeah, to go in and try and like attack like a bunch of different things, that's super hard to do.
And I think this is the problem with the incentives of just the financial model, right?
Yep.
So it is not good enough to be a company that's doing, hey, we're doing $11 million a year and we're growing to 20 next year. And then we'll probably do 35 after that. And then we'll get to 60. And like, that is a freaking great company. That is an incredible business. And in venture capital world, it's kind of like,
it's not though. That's the thing. Venture capital, they have to 5 to 25 million, right? Like I worked for a company that we got shirts that said 5 to 25 million in 1 year. And like, and that's a great goal. Like, don't get me wrong. And that's what was expected. But guess what happened to that company? We had massive layoffs. It was hyper growth, hyper layoffs, and it just really comes down to like, listen, take a step back, get into perspective, quit trying to compare yourselves to like all these big companies. There are unicorns that do that, right? But not everybody has to do that. You're successful where you're at too.
I think what's really painful to me is knowing how many people think those are great goals instead of understanding how incredibly unrealistic and how much failure will accompany a goal like that, right? What's really interesting for me to imagine is if you are willing to sacrifice the one primary benefit that the venture capital asset class brings, which is essentially a giant tax dodge, right? So like the reason venture exists as opposed to like, hey, why don't we just invest in companies and then like see them grow long-term and we all get paid, profitable dividends over time. That was a very, very successful model for a very long time in the United States. Why did that disappear in the like 1970s, 1980s and the rise of, this other asset class happened? And it is because wealthy Americans and corporations in the 60s, 70s, 80s lobbied the federal government to get long-term capital gains tax applied to early stage companies. So if the three of us go put $100,000 into a company 10 years ago and tomorrow it sells for, $100 million, and we make $10 million out of that, our taxes on that $10 million is nothing.
Mm.
Absolutely $0.
I've never
And
considered that.
Yeah, that is why the venture capital industry exists. That's why that asset class exists. And that's why you have this model of, hey, let's put money into hundreds, thousands of companies. Most of them will fail. That's fine. We want a few of them to make us a ton of money, on which we will pay $0 on the first 10 million. And then, ramping up to the capital gains tax rate, which is, a third the rate of what the 40% or whatever that we'd pay if we were actually making tens of millions of dollars a year in income.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and I think the other thing with that too is like, I don't know, it's like another thing with just the 5 to 25. Like, I don't think people realize like the amount of work, pain, suffering that like goes into it. Cause when I hear that, like I instantly think of like Elon Musk and like a thing that he did. And he like did an article and he's like, dude, he's like, I'm like sleeping on the ground in this Tesla factory, or I'm like working 21 hours. Like I'm like not eating, or I'm like puking, or I just spend zero time with like my family or whatever it is. Right. Like the amount of like energy.
I have heard from people who know him that that's complete bullshit. And not true at all. And he does that because like he presents stories like that because it's very embarrassing to not be working that hard and make that much money.
Yep.
Right. And so you have to present to the world an idea that you are struggling. So the reason you're successful is because of your hard work, not because of luck and circumstance and being born to diamond mine owners in apartheid South Africa, where you had nearly slave labor building tens of millions of dollars of value for your family. Like, you don't want to present that. Like, hey, guess why I'm rich? Nobody wants to hear that story. And so Elon Musk and people like him tell other stories.
Yeah. And I think like either way, it's like, I think it's extremely, extremely hard to build like a business. And when you have the pressures of the VCs to grow as fast as they want, that's hard. It takes time and energy. And I think a lot of people don't understand how much time and energy it requires.
100%.
For sure.
It's really weird to have this world where, I think in the world of venture, the investors that I got at Moz were some of the highest quality, best, most ethical people that you can find in that world. And I would still never take money from them again. Right? Like, I think very highly of them. I think if you're going to go the venture path, would I recommend Foundry? Would I recommend Ignition? Absolutely. Great people, very supportive, really good, like wonderful networks. I learned a ton from them. Do I think that you should use that model? Almost no one should, right? And venture capitalists would say the same thing to you. They would tell you VC is wrong for 99% of companies.
Yep.
And I like when they say that, but I wish they wouldn't market to 100% of entrepreneurs.
Yep. Exactly.
So what would you say is your like biggest pet peeve in the business world?
I really dislike how the incentives of sort of capitalism and influence and algorithmic engagement, which social media promotes. I dislike how that confluence of forces incentivizes and inspires a lot of false narratives, right? And a lack of truth telling. Like, it is not in our interests as entrepreneurs or influential people on social media to tell the truth. Our incentive is to paint a picture that makes us look a certain way so that we can further our financial opportunities. I really dislike that. I wish that the incentives would align. That is a true pet peeve of mine. And maybe I'm too forgiving of the individuals who kind of fall prey to that as opposed to the structures. But I think if you're going to change things, you got to change the structure.
Yeah. Give me an example of that, Rand. I'm trying to make sure I kind of understand that. When it says the alignment and stuff like that, tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah. So let's say there's a lot of complicated forces at play in how a particular entrepreneur is choosing to make decisions around whether to do layoffs and restructure their business and figure out a path forward. The incentive for them is to be very inauthentic and non-transparent, and to tell a story around why those layoffs are happening, what's actually happening. Oh, we're doing a restructuring of our workforce so that we can focus on this incredible area of growth in our business that's doing really well. Most of us have learned to read that as like, that's not the whole story and maybe not even partially the truth. But the incentive for the entrepreneur is so overwhelmingly strong that they almost have to tell themselves that lie and believe it so that they can go raise their next round and keep their customers and keep their employees on the team that are incentivized through stock options. And only if the company does that, extraordinary rocket ship growth, are they going to be worth anything. So yeah, man,
no, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
I hate that crap. Right. And then you get a bunch of false stories, like Austin, we were just talking about, right, with Elon Musk sleeping on the factory floor. And it's like, yeah, man, maybe you did that once. Maybe you even did it for a week or something. Maybe it was a publicity stunt, maybe, blah, 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 blah. But like, people are kind of like, nah, you were a little bit of like a weird pot smoking playboy, like going to parties. I don't think that's the whole story.
Yeah. So I guess when it comes to like specifically like technical software development, tell me like how you met your business partner. His name's Casey, right?
Yeah, Casey.
So how did you like meet him? Because there's a ton of challenges when it comes to like building an app, and the first one is finding a solid technical partner. Tell us about the challenges you went through, even just finding somebody like Casey.
So Casey had been a probation officer in Michigan. Which is a super rough gig. And, he saw a lot of the iniquities of our legal system. And, I think it sits hard with him to this day. But he started reading the Moz blog because he was like doing some web design stuff on the side and like building websites and doing some SEO. He started reading the blog. He was commenting on the blog. We started up just like a chat with him and eventually interviewed him for a role at Moz. He came, he was sort of learning on the job, growing his skills, was there. I think he and I worked together at Moz for 3 or 4 years. And then he left, went to Wistia, HubSpot, Ookla, maybe 1 or 2 other places. So he'd been at a bunch of different companies, but he and I had kept in touch. And like whenever we were in Boston, he had moved to Boston. Whenever we were in Boston, Geraldine and I would visit him and his family. And
so there's a relationship built there.
Yeah. We kept a relationship going. And to be honest, like Geraldine and I don't have kids. And so we have the privilege and opportunity of a ton of like travel and relationship building and just lots of friends all over the world. And, we do our best to keep those relationships alive. And so, when Casey moved back to Seattle, he and I were chatting about like, hey, I'm leaving Moz and what are you up to? And he was doing a lot of this like social data aggregation just on the side for a personal project that he was interested in. I was like, hey, maybe we could do something together. And I think, very frankly, if I had not had Casey, I don't know that I would ever attempt to do SparkToro. Like we really took, Austin, we took a combination of what are the skills, interests, passions, unique pieces of value that we could add to a company. And then we built a company around those, as opposed to trying to say, I have a great idea. Let's build that great idea, no matter the fact that we don't have the skills to do it. Like we had a bunch of experience in software as a service. We had a bunch of experience with crawling and aggregating public web data. We had a bunch of experience building a community in the marketing world. We had a bunch of experience building channels that could scale. Like SparkToro is an expression of skills and talents that we uniquely had before. I really, really recommend to startup founders that they do the same thing, that they identify what they're uniquely good at and then build something that takes advantage of that, rather than trying to, I have a great idea. How do I get the skills to do it?
Yes.
Just do what you're good at and capitalize on that.
Right. And look, if you feel like, hey, there's a few things I need to learn and then I'll be a perfect fit for a founder of this company, Great.
Do it.
Go learn those skills, go practice those things, go like pick them up, go work for some other people, go do some consulting, whatever. Awesome. Love that. But I get so nervous when I talk to startup founders who are like, yeah, I'm building a financial transaction engine. Have you ever worked in finance before? No, but this idea is so good.
Ooh, that's nerve-wracking. Which is really kind of interesting. Just kind of stick what you're good at, which is, I think, excellent advice for our listeners. Like, listen, if you're good at something, don't reinvent the wheel. You already know it. But you also said, you made another comment like, listen, if there's a couple things holding you back from taking off, then go learn them. Like, you're not discouraging that by any means. You're just saying, let's just not get out of the realm of what you're good at.
Yeah. I have an insane story for you guys. I don't know if we have time, but like,
do it.
An absolutely mental story. So for years, I have had passion around creative storytelling, and like my wife and I play Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know if you guys have ever played, but it's super fun. A friend of ours got us into it a few years ago, and I was like, oh my God, why didn't I have this when I was a kid? I would have loved this. Like, this is so much fun. I love that stuff. And I kind of wanted to do something in creative world. Like, I just wanted, I don't know if you have that. Like, I'm not a great artist, but I love art. Like, I wish I could do something in that world. Or, oh, maybe I could write a screenplay someday, whatever, right? Like, a lot of people have these kinds of dreams. And so this is maybe 6-9 months ago. I was obsessed with this idea of maybe I could make a video game someday. And Geraldine, my wife, was like, don't do it someday. Like, yeah, you've got a busy schedule. Yeah, you got to do a podcast with Austin and Boudry, but like, you can make time. Like, you can find the time. I believe in you. Go, just do it. Don't wait. Because when you're 50, when you're 60, who knows if you're going to have the energy to do this. So get on it now. And
you've never designed a video game before, right?
Never. I have never done anything in video game world, but I do have a lot of skills building product and like, designing things for a customer base and managing software engineers. And so there's some overlap there. And I just started networking with a ton of people, getting intros to people in video game world, having conversations, learning from them, getting advice on like books I should read. I got a bunch of books that I read and tons of articles, watched YouTube videos, learned more about Unity, like all the game development engine. And then decided I'm going to do it. So I hired a game design consultant, this French guy out of Romania who works with Ubisoft and got to have this team in Los Angeles, a studio down there who's going to like do the building of the game. And there you go. Right? It was just like, let me take this thing that I'm passionate about and these skills that I have, and I'm going to use the skills to like learn a bunch about this. And I'm going to go do my research and stay humble about it. And then I'm going to bring experts onto the team, and who knows?
And like, I fully expect a message on LinkedIn in like 8 and 10 months, whenever this is done, be like, hey, this just released and I'll play it. I will.
Yeah. I mean, in 8 to 10 months, I doubt there'll even be a prototype yet. But in 2 to 3 years, in 2 to 3 years, I will absolutely be like, hey, do you guys want to play this action RPG game I built?
Yes, I do. Absolutely.
Well, and I think there are some like key points to point out to people here. Like, it's not. So I think the big takeaway is like, you should surround your people who complement you and are extraordinarily good at what they do. But the difference is you didn't try and teach yourself how to do it, but instead you just got dangerously familiar enough about it to hire somebody who's not full of shit, basically, right?
Yes. I love that. That is a phenomenal insight. Dangerously familiar enough to be able to call out and recognize great talent versus mediocre talent, to build a network of people who could recommend. Like, before we started working with the studio in LA, I got recommendations from literally half a dozen people who knew them, who had worked with them, who had consulted with them, who had published games with them, to be like, yes, like David and his team are incredible. You should absolutely work with them. I would go with them. I got quotes from like 6 studios. I showed them all to design consultants and game consultants that I hired and paid a few $100 an hour. And like, fantastic. Those experts who had no incentive other than to give me the best possible advice helped me build a network of talented people and learn enough to be dangerous.
That's a skill. A lot of people try and do it themselves instead of becoming just extremely familiar with it and surrounding yourself with people who are good at it, right?
Yep.
I feel like this is part of the puzzle where you can't be cheap about this stuff either.
Yep.
Right?
100.
Like if you're trying to save, and scrimp every dollar, I don't know, we paid like maybe a couple $1,000s to a sort of game sales and marketing consultant. And I could have been like, I know enough about sales and marketing, but do I know enough about it in video game world? I don't think I do. And so I wanted that expertise and advice, and like $2,000. Yeah, it's a lot of money, but man, the bad decision that you could make if you don't spend that money would cost 100 times that.
1,000%. Oh, it's so true. And like, if I were listeners, I would say stop, rewind about 1 minute and just listen to that one more time. Because here's the deal. Like, it's going to cost more money in the long run. It really is, because you can go hire a company. It's funny. Austin, how many calls do we get a week where someone's like, hey, I have this app almost built. I had a team from somewhere else build it. It's nothing that we want. Can you fix it? And we literally go into it like, okay, these guys have already spent $40,000 to build this, and we're going to have to basically start from scratch. Guess who's $40,000 out of the pocket, right? Like, that's just technical debt that they can't get back. And it's true. Like, literally, if and also said it really well, if you're dangerous enough to be able to call the bullshit from other people, you can actually see where you're at kind of going on. And I really feel like that's kind of something that's useful, is if you're not good in some aspect of the business world, find someone that is and learn from them. It really is what it comes down to.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I've done this for years, like probably for 15 years now. I've said, like, anybody who wants to email me and find a great, consultant or agency in digital marketing universe of any kind, just drop me a line. I will happily reach out to my network. I will find you people that I know, like, and trust, and I will give you their email addresses and see who's available for you and like help make that relationship happen, because it is so crucial to me that people don't go find someone who's bad at that work and then develop this idea in their head that, oh, digital marketing or internet marketing, SEO, content, whatever, it's bullshit. Like, I don't believe that it works. And it's because you worked with the wrong person.
Yep.
Right. And so if you can find the right person, like, to your point, are there offshored, outsourced agencies and contractors who can do a great job building apps for you? Absolutely. And for every one of those, are there 10 terrible ones? Yes. So you have to find the good ones. And how are you going to know the good ones? Well, you need to find people who've worked with a bunch of good and bad ones before and can give you advice and have reputations and all that.
Well, and I think the reason why you're so willing to help someone is because how many times in your life have you had someone help you? Right? Like,
so many times.
Yep. And it just means the world to you, because it saves you hundreds of thousands, right?
There's so many people, like, there were people in my network in Seattle and on the West Coast who basically, when I reached out and said, like, hey, I'm thinking about Games World, they hopped on a call. They took an hour of their time. They referred me to people in their network. They said good things about me to the good people in their networks for nothing.
Yep.
Just to be like a good human being.
Yep. 100%. So what do you think plays the biggest role for our listeners, as we're kind of closing up here, the last two questions here? What do you think plays the biggest role on whether you can be successful or not? And you can't say luck, that doesn't count, even though that's a big one. That's a big one. But what do you think is something that they can control that just depends on them being successful?
I like that. I think we all recognize that luck is a huge factor in success, but there are things that you can control. And for me, some of those things have been a mental model of being willing to help and being willing to ask for help, right? So essentially saying, there's a lot of things that I don't know about a topic. How can I find good people who would be willing to help me? And how do I make myself someone that they would want to help? What will inspire them to say, oh, this person reached out. Gosh, I've never heard of them before. I don't know who they are, but their message really resonated with me, right? And part of that is telling an authentic story and being a caring, giving, helpful person and having a network of people that you have helped in the past. I love this model. this is like one of my biggest professional pieces of advice, just for anyone out there, which is to first build your skills. Like when, whatever age you are, build your skills around some topic you're interested in. I'm going to become a great engineer. I'm going to become a great systems architect. I'm going to become a great designer. I'm going to learn a lot about UI. I'm going to learn a lot about video and podcasting, whatever it is. Build your skills, use your skills to help people, which will build your network, and now go out and do your own projects and use your network, the people who you have helped along the way who say, yeah, Rand really knows his stuff when it comes to X, Y, and Z. That's that group of people, whether it's 5 people or 50 or 500, that will be instrumental in you being able to launch your own project and have success, because you have people who are invested in that success and care about you beyond a financial incentive. There's a pay it forward attitude. I think this is one of the best parts of human relationships and networking, is that it can exist outside of even our financial incentives and capitalism. Like it can be really beautiful. So skills, network, launch.
I love that. And I was going to ask you, what other pieces of advice would you like give to people before we head off? But I think just being able to grow your skills, build a network, and then build like a team around you. Like, I don't know, that's like a super important thing, right? That's basically business. That's all business is.
Yeah. And look, I think the other big piece of advice that I think relates to a lot of the first half of our conversation is that the definition of success is up to you. It is not defined by these outside external parties. You do not have to conceptualize, successful entrepreneur means I've sold X many businesses for Y many millions of dollars, or success means I've raised this money, or success means my team is this big. You get to choose what success means to you. And when you redefine success as something that is achievable, something that is long-term, something that pays dividends in more ways than purely, high-risk finances, the world opens up.
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell you how much different my everyday life is, how well I sleep, how well I don't know, how much better of a person I can be, just a functioning human being, with SparkToro's incentive structures versus my old incentive structure at Muse.
Mm-hmm.
It's night and day.
Well, and I think that changes when you have a board of investors that are telling you what success means, right? Too, like you lose a little bit of control, and it's a little bit harder too. So, really, it comes down to what you want to feel is success.
It's so weird to me. I was having this conversation over email with someone about. It was on Twitter. It was another founder who basically was like, "Gosh, I'm looking at these companies that have gone public, in my sphere, and I feel a lot of jealousy and regret that I didn't build those." And I'm like, "Hey, man, you have a business that every year is spitting off profits and dividends and continues to grow. Maybe it's not as fast as you want, but I don't think you understand how happy you are, how much better your life is compared to those people." Yep. You look at the number, you're going to be very misled.
Yep.
And awesome. I don't know who I heard this from, but it's like, seriously, it's like comparison is like the bane of everybody's like existence, right? Like as soon as you start comparing yourself to other people, you're just opening up a whole can of worms that is unnecessary. Don't do it.
Yep.
But to close it off, Rand, thanks so much for jumping on with us. Like, where can people find you, and where can they find your book? And yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So if you want to follow the stuff that I'm doing, I'm most active on Twitter, where I'm at Randfish. But obviously you can check out my blog, which is at sparktoro.com/blog. You can, if you want to set up a free SparkToro account, we have a forever free. So it's not free trial. It's just anyone can run free searches and see what's going on there. And yeah, if I can be personally helpful, like I mentioned about, I don't know, finding you a digital marketing person or whatever it is, you can drop me a line direct. I'm rand@sparktoro.com.
And then where do they find your book at?
Oh, the book is Lost and Founder. If you Google it, it's available at every bookstore. Thankfully, it's Penguin Random House, so whatever, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, IndieBound, Powell's Bookstore in Portland, if you want to go there.
Everywhere. Just Google it, Lost and Founder, and buy it. I think it'll make a big difference.